Welcome to Kairos Research Center podcast, Christian faith seeking understanding, intellectual witness, and spiritual renewal.
There are four Gospels. Is it true that there are conflicting narratives of the resurrection in the four Gospels?
Okay, you raised the question of contradictions between the narratives of the four Gospels. I don't mind I use the word alleged contradiction now. When I say alleged contradiction, I mean when you put the Gospel side by side, they seem to contradict one another in certain places. There are areas of agreement, areas in disagreement, and face value, they contradict. But when you look at them carefully, there are ways to harmonize them. But if you want to know what I mean, I show in the slide here, the reports of the resurrection account of the four Gospels put together, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You look at the slides, they are presented. What you notice is that there are parallel accounts, there are similarities and dissimilarities. You just take your time, you can pause your video now, look at the chart. Where they are in print, put in ordinary print, they are in agreement. But where they seem to be disagreement, you'll find they're in italics. So, for example, number 4, they went to see the tomb, according to Matthew. According to Mark, they went to anoint Jesus' body. And then Luke said they were taking spices. And then in Gospel of John, no reason was given. And in fact, Nicodemus seems to have anointed the body earlier, before burial. So here you have a so-called discrepancy. And then item 6, an angel, a young man, two men, two angels. So what seems to be discrepancies according to the critics? Go to the next chart. Same thing also. Item number 14, Jesus met 2 women, but the others do not seem to mention it. So I would want to say, if you look at all this carefully, you will notice indeed there are variations in the various reports. We acknowledge that. But would these variations be fatal to the testimonies of the gospel? Well, I would say the common experience of people who are relying on eyewitnesses, not one eyewitness, but eyewitnesses, is that eyewitnesses give a report according to their perspective, from their point of view. And if there's no collaboration between them, like one clever lawyers will do with them, they will give a certain angle which at the surface level might seem to contradict one another. But because of that, we will say, most of us will say, common sense says, what do you expect? That coming from different angles. So we would expect variation. The question is, can they be harmonized? And by right, we should not rule out the possibility that they can be harmonized.
Okay, in that case, how should the four accounts be harmonized?
Okay, well, we need to work out some of the criterion, so to say. First of all, in order to take an account seriously, you must give it the benefit of the doubt. The assumption, let's say, we work on the assumption the gospel are authentic. If the gospel are not authentic to you, don't even bother to talk about harmonizing them. So we look at the internal style of the writings of the gospel. We take note that there is this immediacy of the report, which seems to be what you expect when they are actual eyewitnesses. I have read other holy scriptures which tend to report these things in very generic terms. But interestingly, when you read the gospel, they're full of proper names, actual towns, actual people, dates, cultural details, custom. They're all given in concrete details so that you can verify for yourself whether these dates and towns and names and officials are they consistent with what we understand of life and of the time, And indeed, the gospel show intimate knowledge of Israel, Jerusalem, at the of Jerusalem, in particular prior to its destruction in AD 70. And as I've said, the gospels have a genuineness. It doesn't hide stories of the weaknesses of the disciples. Who, for example, I used to joke, if I were Jesus choosing disciples, I wouldn't have chosen any of them. I would have chosen more classy disciples, more competent disciples. But the faults of the disciples are all laid bare for us to see. And in fact, one interesting fact about all this gospel was that there was no attempt to harmonize them. If the gospels were due to forgers, we would have expected them to come together and harmonize them properly. So, I think there's a case to consider harmonization of the gospel, but I think a caveat is necessary. Sometimes, in our eagerness, the conservative, to harmonize everything in the gospel, we can become very artificial in our harmonization. I may want to say, first of all, forced harmonization is worthless. So we want to avoid that. But there is the opposite tendency today. Opposite tendency is the opposite. And that is to force the New Testament into disharmony. There is this thing called redaction criticism by the scholars, which want to emphasize Luke has a certain thing to say, Matthew has a certain thing to say, and the focus is on the differences rather than the commonality and the apparent and how they could be harmonized together. So we want to avoid the two extremes, which is forced harmonization on the one hand, the other one is the opposite reluctance to harmonize the gospel account. So I think we must acknowledge that moderns have prejudices against harmonization. Yes, we want to acknowledge the gospel, report the resurrection on their own terms, each of them. And that's why there are variations. And that's why it happens. But at the same time, rather than to reject them all based on some apparent inconsistency as worthless, I think let us recognize although there was no attempt to corroborate and produce one single account, the apostolic witnesses were also sharing activities together for many years. And they also could be drawing from the same memories, I want to say. So they could be they could be harmony, and yet at the same time, different way of telling these events from a different perspective. So I think let us give them the benefit of the doubt, and then the test is in finding whether they can cohere. And if I may turn the table, I will say that there are critics who are also making accusations of the unreliability of the gospel account of the resurrection based on their own assumptions, which I call mistakes. For example, the critics assume that the Bible must be guilty until proven innocence. Then they don't take the context seriously. Very often I get very irritated by video YouTube fellows who simply interpret the Bible out of context. Then they assume that a partial report is a false report. Just because Matthew or Mark or Luke, they do not report everything, then there must be mistakes in what they are trying to report. Then they assume that if there are divergences, then there must be false. Then they also forget, you may want to say, that they expect the Gospels to be scientifically precise like modern people. Sometimes in the report, if there are two people, one author may single on one of the two witnesses, and the other single complete include the two. So one Gospel will say one angel, the other say two angels. So it's a question of what interests the writer when he makes the report. So I think it's easy to cast doubts just because the record doesn't tell us everything we want to find. And so, let's say, in short, keep an open mind, take a closer look at the evidence. And I would say that while the gospel record on the surface seems to have discrepancy, I will introduce you to some of the suggested harmonization, which, granted they are interpretations, nonetheless should encourage us to keep an open mind. Let me just rephrase to show you what are we attempting to harmonize. So I have this chart now. Pericope just means a passage lah. So there are several facts that need to be taken into account in any of the harmonization. The women were at the tomb. Jesus appeared to the women. Then the guard report. Jesus also appeared to two on the way to Emmaus. And then Jesus got first appearance to the disciples when Thomas was absent. And that's why Thomas was very skeptical, unless I can put my finger in the wound. And there's another account where Jesus appeared to his disciples with Thomas present. And then Jesus also appeared to the 11 on the mountain. And then Jesus appeared to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And then so these are some of the central facts that will have to be harmonized. Now, I can harmonize two ways. One, I just list out to you what I think is a series of events that could flow one from the other. This is just a plausible reconstruction of the events or harmonization. And given the report's not been 100% complete, there could be variation even in our harmonization. But that's how we humans analyze records that come from different witnesses. So one way to listen to the event is how things unfold. Early in the morning, there was an earthquake, which some reported, some didn't record, and in the earthquake, the stone was rolled away. Then after that, a group of women came to the tomb, early at dawn, some say, and then they saw the tomb empty. So the tomb was rolled away. Then the women saw the tomb, of which Mary straight away rushed to Peter and John to tell. She rushed away home to tell Peter and John that, and drew the conclusion that Jesus' body has been stolen. John 20 verse 2. The other women who went with her stayed at the tomb, stayed in the garden, and then they entered the tomb and they saw two angels. So Mary was away. The other women saw the two angels. And then the women, of course, ran away from the garden filled with joy. Then later in the day, Jesus met them. Actually, I would say on their way to Bethany. If I show you what was happening on the map, in the map. And Jesus tell them to bear the word to the disciples. Then number 7, Peter and John, informed by Mary, came to the tomb. And after the women had left. So Mary went back to tell Peter and John. And then she brought the two of them to the tomb. Then, but by the time they arrived at the tomb, the other women have left for Bethany. And then they saw the clothes, and John weakly concluded that Jesus was alive. Then Mary returned to the tomb. So Peter and John left, and then because they ran faster than the woman, and then when Mary came, saw two angels, and then saw Jesus. And so there's an event of Jesus with Mary. And then after that, the women told the disciples, but the disciples, which disciples couldn't be Peter and John, but the other disciples. And then, but they didn't believe them because, women are, all the fanciful tales, emotional tales. And then Jesus appeared to the disciples when they gathered together. So in a sense here, this sequence of events would, I would say, allow us to, and then of course, number 12, you have the walk of Emmaus. And then finally, number 14, appearings to first without Thomas and then with Thomas. So you can read this chart and then take a time to see whether they do fit the facts of the 4 Gospels combined together. Now, so I think now and then you find a New Testament scholar who will do this exercise, not being dogmatic about the possible reconstruction of the events, but showing that it is possible. Now, when I give you this list, you'll find that it can be rather abstract to you. So I think I've decided to show you something else, which is to put these events in the context of a certain maps. So I show you this chart, which I will put onto my website, Crisis and Praxis. I take this from this book, the Easter Enigma. Okay, there are 2 copies here. The Easter Enigma by John Wenham, where he carefully, having stayed in Jerusalem for a while, he got very familiar with the streets and geography of Jerusalem. And so he looked at the things concretely on the ground. He could explain how the gospel events, despite some apparent discrepancies, actually could be explained if you understand the geography of Jerusalem and the movements of the disciples and the women at the time. Now, first of all, I'll show you the chart. He gives the relationship of the actors who are involved. You will notice there are more than one Mary, and that can cause a lot of confusion. You get Mary who married Joseph, Mary who married Cleopas. And then they notice they're related to James, there are 2 James, one James on the left hand side, one James on the right hand side. So these are the different events, different actors. Then you need to know a bit of the geography. You'll find that here is Jerusalem. Jerusalem, where on the top left, on the left-hand corner, there's a tomb. In the middle of the left-hand corner is the tomb. You have the temple area. You notice for John Wenham, John's house and Mark's house are in Jerusalem. And the reason to conclude that is that they seem to stay on in Jerusalem at night, whereas the other disciples went off to Bethany on the right-hand side. Bethany, top bottom right-hand corner, Bethany, 2 miles away, about 2 miles away. And so John and Mark, John could be even come from a priestly family because he seemed to be known by the priest. So this will be the location of notice that the tomb on the left-hand corner, top left, and then the tomb is different from the garden tomb, by the way, So, and the tomb has 2 entrances, the Genaf Gate and the Ephraim Gate. So the women could miss each other if they enter the tomb through a different gate, so to say. So, okay, so this is the geography. So John's house especially is in here in the earlier chart, was within Jerusalem itself. So some of them could have been staying there after the burial of Jesus, including Mary. The rest have gone off to Bethany. So now what happened was, I will go straight now. What was happening? On Sunday morning, this is slide number 10. On Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary and other Mary set off to Bethany. Then there was an earthquake. While it was still dark, there was an earthquake. The angel removed the gravestone. Clopas stays at John's house with Salome, joined two Marys. So Salome and two Marys, they went to the tomb via the Kenneth grave, which is on the left-hand corner, in contrast to the Ephraim gate, which is on the right-hand side. Then they saw the tomb open. What I want to say is that the women saw the tomb open. They rushed back to tell John. This is this page 83. And then page 83. Then Joanna and Susanna, who were with the Hasmonean palace, they also went there to the tomb and then saw the angels. So they rushed back to the city and tell. So they rushed back to the city to tell on the way to John's house on the left hand side. So while Joanna, Susanna, Salome, and Mary of Clopas were on the left hand side, on the right hand side, Joanna and Susanna went. The other one went in the. So they went there. Sorry, they first went to the tomb and then they rushed. Number one, they went to the tomb. Number two, they rushed back to John's house to tell what they saw. So John and Peter set off for the tomb immediately after they heard Mary. So on the left hand side, you see the movement. And then they saw the empty tomb. John believed. Mary lingered on in the tomb. And then she saw the angels. Jesus appeared to her. And then she returned to John's house. So meanwhile, Mary, wife of Clopas and Salome, went on to Bethlehem. So they saw the angels. In Sunday morning, chart 4, they went off to Bethlehem to tell the other disciples. But the other Clopas, the two men, they went off set off for Emmaus. And then they met Jesus. So what I want to say is, you will find that if you follow this chart that I give to you, the women running around Jerusalem, they in the narrow back streets, they knew, of course, if they stay in Jerusalem, they knew the back doors, and going through all the back lanes, they could miss one another. So one set of women, Mary, ran back to John's house to tell John and Peter. The other one went off to Bethany to tell the other disciples. So the two group of women could miss one another. Peter and John. The other group of women went to Bethany. On the way to Bethany, Jesus met them on the road and told them, the angel met them on the road and told them to tell the other disciples we meet them in Galilee. So what is the bottom line? And of course, after they have done that, they gathered together in Mark's house in the night, and Jesus appeared to them without doubting Thomas. And finally, in Bethany, Jesus also appeared to them now with Thomas the doubter. What am I trying to do with this exercise? What I'm trying to say is that if you look at the chart, look at the map of Jerusalem, each of the gospel record give a certain distinctive description of the movements of the disciples during the resurrection event. One sat between the tomb and the house of John, Peter, John, and Mary. So they were going up and down. The other group of women from Susanna's house, the house of Hasmon, who was staying in the Hasmonean palace, they saw the tomb along and they went differently towards Bethany. And so you have different set of events. And then along with the group, another group of two men left off to Emmaus. So what is very natural, therefore, given the complexity of these movements, of the three different groups of people surrounding the resurrection event, naturally the gospel would be giving a different emphasis for each of these groups. And so go back to the parallel charts, you find, therefore, the details that are recorded from that particular perspective will be different. But what I'm trying to show is that based on the first set of tabulated events, notwithstanding the alleged contradictions, you can line them up as a plausible sequence of events. And then the maps that I show you now will show that because of the different routes available to the movement of these people, they don't meet one another. They also give rise to a different set of perspective. And that explains the different reports in the gospel. Bottom line is, look a bit carefully, you'll find that we have a plausible harmonization of the events.